Hello, my name is Jagmohan Singh Chawla and I'm a product manager with SAP Cloud ALM. In this video, let's have a deep dive into requirement management. This will be a long video, but it will be indexed with timestamps and chapters. So you can go through the description of the video, look at the chapter list, and quickly skip to the section of your choice. So let's get started. So what does SAP Cloud ALM offer for requirements? It offers fantastic support in your fit to standard workshops in which business users can actually collect the requirements in context of a business process. Then these requirements can be broken down into smaller units if desired, such as you can break a requirement into user stories. If you are following agile methodology, then you can definitely assign the user stories to sprints. If you are following a release plan, which is common across projects, then you can also plan your requirements in a particular release so that your end-to-end testing can be planned much better. But we'll go through all these functionalities step by step. So let's proceed. What is the life cycle of a requirement? And requirement is primarily targeted towards the business user. So the business user starts by creating a requirement in a stage called in refinement. In that, there could be more details that could be required before it can be sent to approval. And here we'll also shortly see in the system, approval is an optional step. If you have a scenario such as pre-approved requirements, you really don't need this status. You can directly switch to processing of a requirement, which is basically the realization stage. And in realization, then you begin actual work on the requirements, such as you break down a requirement into smaller units called project tasks and user stories. Then you actually combine those user stories into shippable units called features. So features is not the focus of this video, but it is extremely essential if you are interested in handling of deployments, deployment orchestration, or transport movement. For that, I would recommend you watch a dedicated video for features. But as a business user, I follow a typical V curve. So I have my requirements and I do my user acceptance testing at those requirements. If I break down my requirements into smaller units called user stories, then I can also do my functional testing for my user stories. And after things are fine, when the business users are convinced that their requirement has been fulfilled, then they can even set the confirmed status. So what are the capabilities we are going to see in this video? We are going to see how you can create requirements, what are the different avenues, such as you can create them via a process, you can create them manually or via an Excel upload. You can also actually create requirements via APIs. Then we'll see requirement hierarchy. What is this and how can you actually bring directly a hierarchy-based requirements from an Excel sheet? We'll see how requirements are connected to other entities such as features and test cases. And we'll also see how you view requirements, how you track and trace requirements in different dimensions. And we are going to spend a lot of time on that. So let's proceed. The advantages. One of the main advantage of SAP Cloud ALM is you can get rid of all the Excel sheets which are offline and become quickly out of date when you try to collect requirements with that channel. Here, the idea is a very different and fresh thinking in which requirements are collected in context of a business process and sometimes even a business process step. That way, the business can have an aggregated view over a period of time, how many requirements were submitted for a business process, and you can actually do even for your own custom created business processes. Later, you can see a view called Solution Process Traceability, in which you can see those requirements and you can track and trace from a business angle how those requirements are doing. So it's a very different thing. So definitely it's an alternate way of working. You can create the requirements manually, you can bring them via an API, or you can bring via an Excel upload, and we'll see this in the system. So let's go to the requirement list. So I'm logged on to SAP Cloud ALM system, and you can see I have different tiles on my launchpad. And the tile that is of immediate interest for me is the requirement tile. So here I'm in my requirement list, and you can see I have a filter panel at the top and the result list at the bottom. And the filters that are shown can be extended by clicking on this Adapt Filters. As an example, if I want to see requirements created by a particular person, I can extend my filter criteria. Or if I work in a release-based fashion and I see how many requirements are assigned to a particular release, I can do that easily. In the bottom, I also see the result list, and I can see the columns, or I can extend them if I desired. As an example, all requirements have unique ID, which can be enabled easily. So now let's talk of requirement hierarchy. Requirements can be broken down into user stories or project tasks depending on your need. What we recommend is user stories are mainly used to capture functional requirements which are testing relevant, and project tasks are used for such as coordination or other activities. User stories and project tasks can also be broken down into further smaller units called subtasks. And if you want to see this hierarchy view, then in the requirement list, there is an alternate view called Gantt chart, which also gives you this information in a hierarchical fashion. You can bring your requirements from an Excel sheet easily. And the good part is you can even bring structured information. So this means you can pre-decompose your requirements into user stories and subtasks. If you want, you can always add relations in the Excel sheet, and then you can bring this Excel sheet to system. So let's see how it can be done. I have a companion blog post which has a template that you can easily find to upload requirements and also detailed instructions. I'll put the link to this blog post in the video description. So let's see what is this upload template for requirements and download it. So I'm looking at the download template, and let's see how you can make use of it. First thing you notice in this Excel sheet are multiple worksheets. The main worksheet is the items one in which you enter data that you want to upload. And the remaining worksheets actually tell you the allowed values. As an example, if you go to the type worksheet, then you know this is the only possible thing you can use as a type. So you can use the same Excel sheet to upload requirements and user stories together. So what are the allowed values for sources? What are the allowed values for status or requirement status? So you can see this Excel sheet has two requirements, requirement 1 and requirement 2. And both these requirements have children, and it is indicated by using this parent row. And if you want to establish relationships between two requirements, you can use this predecessor column and you can establish relationships. One of the extremely powerful capabilities is using workstreams. And here you can even use custom workstreams. So let's say if I have a custom workstream and I want to use that. So you can see I have added a custom workstream called my custom workstream. I can also use custom tags. So in this case, I have used tags my tag 1 and my tag 2. The idea is if you want to denote a particular way of working, so let's say you have an org structure by plants, or you work by LOBs, or by multi-country rollout, you have these two flexible dimensions using custom workstreams or custom tags to depict your way of working, and you can later use these options in filtering. In fact, the traceability reports and many other reports already provide these filter dimensions, giving you quite flexible way of working. So I'm back into my requirement list, and I have filtered on requirements created today, and you can see there is no data here. I've also added a type filter and included user stories and project tasks along with requirements. So this also means you can use the same application, requirement application, to see user stories and even project tasks in the same view, especially you are working in a hierarchical fashion. So let's upload the Excel sheet that we just created. So the system identifies that there are 7 artifacts that need to be created. So let's do that. And you can see all the 7 artifacts shown into the system. So you can see how easy it is to bring your external data mapped with your specific filter criteria. So let's see if the entities have the custom workstream and the custom tags that we wanted. So I'll go to the first requirement. And you can see this requirement already has user story and project task associated with this. It has already relation to the second requirement as a successor. It has some references which we wanted. And let's see, it has the custom workstream and the custom tag. So within seconds, you can bring your own data into the system and then later use SAP Cloud ALM for processing. So what is the advantage? The advantage is everything is online. Your reports will always show current data. People can work in parallel. You can have things such as comments in which people can easily collaborate and say where they are stuck, what they are missing. And you also see a very detailed history log. So I added a comment. And let's see how's my history. And this is extremely efficient. SAP Cloud ALM supports a trust-based way of working in which a requirement assigned to person A can be processed by person B, and still they can view this history log to ensure that there is no abuse of this functionality. So let's see what if I want to see this information in a hierarchy. I can switch to the Gantt view and I can see a nice hierarchy, the dates, as well as the dependencies which we established using the Excel sheet. What if you have to process multiple artifacts? You don't have to do them one by one. So let's say if I want to set the status of both of these requirements to confirmed, I can select them, I can go to mass edit, and then I can use the status confirmed. So this mass edit also saves a lot of your time. If you remember, we changed the filters panels at the top and the result list at the bottom. If you don't want to do this every time you access the requirement list, you should use the view functionality. So you can create a custom view and you can set it as default. Now let's look at attributes of a requirement in detail. And let me start by creation of a new requirement. Before I create a new requirement, I wanted to show you a special relationship between the type filter and the options which are available in the create menu. These are actually correlated. So you can see now I see 3 options: creation of a project, task, user story, or a requirement. If you find it confusing, then you can switch off the user story and project task processing from the type section. So that means in this view, you are able to see only requirements, and you see the create option only shows requirements. If you work with user stories and requirements together, you can change the type to include user stories. And you see now the create option also shows you how to create a user story. So these two options are correlated, and that makes your way of working as your preference. Some users like to work only with one transaction at one time, but some users who are more power users are comfortable having multiple transactions shown to them at the same time. So let's create a new requirement. So I have created a new requirement, and now let's see what are the attributes. And let's also talk about the status and approval, how they are related and where they should be used. Approval is an optional step. Not every team or every project want their requirements to be approved, but some do. So it's your choice. If your requirements do not need approval, then you can just ignore this approval field and you can leave it to not assigned it will not affect your way of working. But in case you want a certain process to be followed, that means the requirements should be approved before actual work starts, then you should use this approval field. But please note, at this stage, the coupling between the approval and requirement status is minimal to none at all. That means your approval state does not affect your requirement status. So it's more enforced by process than by a technical constraint in the system. With that disclaimer, let's see how should you work if you want approvals for a requirement. The first thing is the person who created the requirement should ensure that there is adequate information in the requirement worthy for an approver to review. Once that maturity is achieved, then the person who is working on the requirement should switch the status to in approval. And the approver could have a specific view, which I just showed, for all requirements in the status in approval. And now I'm switching the hat and assume I'm an approver. Then I have multiple options. I can say maybe this requirement is too trivial, I do not want to approve. So as an approver, I can just say no approver required. That means it's explicitly still logged in history that even though approval was not required, the approver gave a confirmation that it's okay with me to proceed without the need for my approval. Maybe it's below a certain budget and that's where approval was not even needed. And now let's discuss the case when approval is required. The person who is submitting the requirement should do two things. The person should set the status to an approval. At the same time, the person should set the approval state to ready for approval so that the approver does not waste their time to monitor requirements which have not come to this stage yet. And now if I'm an approver, this is the view I would store. I would actually like to see requirements in the status approval, but also in the approval state ready for approval. And then I have two options. So if you notice carefully, the options in this menu are changing based on your previous interaction. Earlier, we were not seeing these two options approved or rejected, but when the approval state is switched to ready for approval, now as an approver, I have a choice to go approved or reject. Let's take the happy path and I approve the requirement. And this is a one-way move. After I approve it, I cannot change my mind. And that's fine with me. And I see the approval is approved. And now the approval state can no longer be changed and work can proceed. So as a reminder, you should use the approvals only if you need them, and you can only enforce it by process, but not by any technical constraints. Even the authorizations are not that stringent, but in future there is plan that SAP Cloud ALM can have more stricter authorizations. And now since the approval is in place, the person working on the requirement then switches the process to in realization and starts decomposing the requirement into smaller units. Here I must tell you what are the flexible options offered by SAP Cloud ALM. If you think you just work with requirements and you do not want to deal with smaller units such as user stories or project tasks, that's okay. You do not have to. You can directly put a requirement into a timeline such as a phase, sprint, or a release, and you can work with that. So the system supports this way of working. It's really super lightweight. So you can directly work with requirement transactions. You can use the release assignment. You can use the time box assignment, and the system will support you. Even if you want to assign requirements to sprints directly, that's your wish. You can do that. What we expect is from a requirement, you create user stories, and the same requirement can be broken down quickly into multiple user stories. However, if you want to work with this requirement hierarchy and you want to create user stories for a requirement, you can use the Excel upload as I described earlier, or you can use this menu option to directly create entities from a requirement. So now let's talk about requirement attributes. A requirement can be directly created from a process. If that is done, then this process context is automatically filled. And this is actually the most common use case, because when you do your fit to standard workshops, the expectation is you create the requirement in context of a business process, and this is filled automatically. So let's go to a process and create a requirement. So now let's assume a scenario in which a business user is reviewing this, and after the delivery, they also want to create a delivery note. And maybe that's not offered by the system, because maybe this delivery note has to have a barcode or a QR code in a particular format. And that is a requirement for a business user. So rather than capturing it in an Excel sheet, the business user just clicks here and gets these options to create a requirement. So the business creates this requirement and presses save and close. With that, you are automatically taken back to the process screen. So there you see the value proposition. You capture the requirement in context of your business process, and when in future you want to track this process via process traceability, you know this process had a requirement. And let's see now the attributes of the requirement. So now you can see the context, the process context for this requirement is automatically populated. The requirement have the work streams. Some of these work streams are delivered by SAP Activate methodology, but you can easily create your own custom work streams via Excel upload. Requirements have this approval state that we discussed, and they have their own status schema. This is the status schema. It cannot be extended. If you want additional status, then one of the easiest option is to use custom tags. You can have priority for the requirements. Even this priority list is fixed. If you want a custom priority, then I have the same answer. Please use custom tags. Why we have enforced these limitations? Because we have some pre-built reports. We want to keep your experience harmonious, and that's where we want this to be as simple as possible for consumption. How requirements are planned. And let's spend some time on this topic. It also depends on your project lead, on how the project lead is working. If the project is really simple with maybe just one product, a very clear strategy, then maybe the project is not using release management at all. In that case, the requirements can be directly assigned to time boxes. So the time boxes are phases, sprints, or even milestones. So in case you want to plan this way, then you can directly assign a requirement to a time box, and maybe that's sufficient for you. But what if there is a release plan assigned to the project via a deployment plan assignment? Means maybe the scenario is slightly more complicated, in which there are multiple parallel releases. Typical example is multi-country rollout, in which maybe country A, B, and C are going on at the same time, and each one have their own release. And you want to quickly categorize that this requirement is relevant for which release. This is extremely important to plan your deployments, your feature movement, and even your test strategy. This actually is the more common usage, in which you plan requirements with a release schedule, and then from a practical perspective, the project lead knows this is the timeline I have to ensure for my integration testing. SAP Cloud ALM also has a nice team concept, in which you can assign a requirement to a team, a role, or an individual. Each of the requirement has a unique ID, and this ID is extremely valuable. If you want to quickly search for a particular requirement, you can use this ID for searching. If you want to mass update requirements using the Excel sheet, that is also possible. You can download the data, edit it, and upload it again. We recently added a new field called involved parties. When it comes to assignment, the requirement can be assigned only to an individual. So only one person is responsible for the requirement, but more than one can be involved. And that's recently added. That means you can have a clear indication If there are multiple people involved with the requirement, that should be mentioned in the involved parties. But if there is only one person responsible for bringing the requirement home, that should be entered here. And then we have the custom tags. So we saw how you can add a custom tag with an Excel sheet upload, but you can also easily add a custom tag by just typing here. So let's do that. So I'm adding a new custom tag. Now let's spend some time on requirement relations. A requirement can be related to another requirement, which we saw in the previous example, but a requirement can have this parent-child relationship with entities such as a user story or project task, in which these could be child elements from a requirement. Requirement can also be associated to a feature. One requirement can have multiple features, but one feature can only have one requirement. And that's understandable. The requirements can be bigger in nature, in which it is more complicated functionality. Maybe the requirements are integration requirements cutting into different product lines, and this is where the same requirement can have multiple features. But in the other direction, the feature can have multiple user stories, but still will contribute primarily only to one requirement. And that's where we have made it in this way. The requirements can have test cases assigned. Even user stories can have test cases assigned, because this is really important for your completion check. Requirements can have references. So references can be, as an example, SharePoint documents or any other links which are relevant for the requirement. And now let's jump to the last topic, requirement reporting. You may be aware SAP Cloud ALM has two main reporting sources. One is this overview page, and the second one is analytical reports. In the overview page, there are some cards specifically for requirements, especially these two cards. You can see your requirements by status or by priority, and you can also see how the requirements are distributed across different scopes, across teams, across work streams, and by tags. So you have a lot of quick analysis available on the overview. But if you want more details, then you should look at these analytical reports. One of the best reports is requirement traceability. As we discussed the requirement lifecycle, requirement may be broken down into smaller units, such as user stories. These user stories could have been combined into features which are ready for deployment. And then during the journey, there could be some test cases which are also attached to the requirement. So to process this, you need a totality view. You need a traceability view which tells you how is my requirement doing. This is also very visual, so you can easily say that requirement 2 is going to run into problem because one project task is blocked. So this is, you can say this report is a multi-entity monitor, and you can quickly see and click, and you can with least effort go to the exact transaction that may need your attention. Another huge advantage is you can jump from the analytical view to the work list easily. You can select some requirements here, and then you can click on this requirement overview, which will take you to the requirement list. Okay, that's all I wanted to cover in this video. There are a lot of blog posts that are released for this topic, which I'll also try to include in the description of this video. Hope this video was useful. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned to the channel. Thanks and have a great day. Bye-bye.